Today, we're learning about 5 mistakes you need to avoid when building a PC. Let's get into it. Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Adrian Reddix, and today we're talking about the 5 mistakes to avoid when you're starting off building a PC. If this is your first time ever building a PC, there's some little nuances that a lot of people really don't talk about as much that you should avoid whenever you're doing things like this. If you like this kind of information, hit the subscribe button, give me a thumbs up, and let's get into it. The first mistake you need to avoid is adding too much thermal paste or not enough thermal paste. So what do I mean? So whenever you're putting your CPU in and you got it in there and you did it all correctly, you hadn't bent any pins, that's important. Whenever you put the thermal paste on, people tend to put more than what they need. Usually that's not a problem, but sometimes you can get some thermal paste that's conductive. And if you look around your CPU, you see all these components around it. And if it's conductive, you can do some damage to your board. You want to put enough to cover everything, but not too much to have it spill out over your board. A couple techniques people use, you have patterns that you can draw that try to control the spread whenever you put your cooler on your CPU. You have the dot, the P, the X, it's a whole bunch of them. The Y, you have one where you put it in 3 lines, and the goal is to make sure you have coverage without having too much spilling over. On the flip side of that, you don't want to have too little paste. If you took physical science anytime in school, you know that there's no such thing as a completely flat surface. Every surface has ridges. And so when you take 2 pieces of metal, it seems like they're sitting flush, but they're not. You have these rigid molecules and they can't get full contact. So what thermal paste does, it takes the surface area and makes sure it gets every part of the surface, let's say the CPU. So it gets in all those crannies and bumps and makes a 100% contact between the cooler and the CPU, right? So if you don't add enough, you have, even though it looks like it's close together, you have air gaps. And air doesn't transfer heat as well as thermal paste. And so as you get higher temperatures, and you can get things like thermal throttling. And way back when, before they started thermal throttling, you could burn up a CPU. So make sure you have enough. So if you follow one of the patterns, you should have enough on there. And if you see any spillage, get a Q-tip and some 99% alcohol. And if you get, I know it's tight, if you can get in there and just clean it up if you have too much. The second thing you need to avoid when building a PC and you're a beginner is over-tightening screws. Just like anything in life, over-tightening never does anything. So let's go back to the CPU. Well, the CPU, whenever you put the cooler on top of the CPU, you want to make sure that it spreads, right? And so people think the tighter you get it on there, the more it'll spread, which, yeah, that's correct. What you have to realize is if you look around the CPU socket, you'll see a bunch of bus lines and channels and components around it. And putting pressure on your board, you can cause breaks and things on your motherboard. And now you have a ruined board because you over tighten it. They do have some CPU coolers that have mechanisms to try to help prevent that. Not only CPUs, but over tightening your fans, causing your cases to crack and warp or anything. So whenever you're tightening screws, you screw it until it doesn't go anymore, and then maybe just like a 16th, just like this. Not much. You don't want to go a whole quarter turn or 1/8 turn, just enough just to make it snug. And that's all you need. You don't need any high torque or anything like that. Just tighten it just enough. The third mistake you need to avoid is picking single channel over dual channel memory. What is that? So single channel memory is, you just have one channel to access your memory bandwidth. When it comes to gaming, dual over single channel has really no difference because the way games work, it really doesn't matter. But if you're building a PC to be a streaming box or especially editing, you need as much memory and as fast as you could possibly get. And picking dual channel will help you access more memory, get your tasks done faster. And if you're doing live stream, it just gives you more resources and uses what you have more efficiently. So if it's not a gaming PC, it's really not relevant. But when you're talking about 4K editing or editing period or streaming or something that is memory intensive, having dual channel over single channel is something that you should do. If you have dual channel when it comes to your game PC, it's not gonna hurt it, but I find that people who get into gaming might want to start streaming, or they might want to start putting videos on YouTube or what have you. So, you know, even if you are gaming, by having dual channel memory, you can grow in the future. To me, if you want to make that step in the future, it gives you that flexibility without having to go and buy a whole nother kit. And usually when you get dual kits that come with 2 sticks of RAM, usually they're cheaper than buying them than piecemeal into one 4 gig stick and another 4 gig stick separately. Usually when they come in kits, they're usually cheaper, but that's just economics. That's what that is. The fourth mistake you need to avoid is making sure that your fans are in the right direction, aka managing your airflow. If you know how fans work, you know they have a blade and they're at an angle. If you have to, usually they'll have front and back on fans. And you just need to make sure that your case manages your airflow to the back. That's your goal, even if you have a radiator on top or a radiator on the bottom or whatever. You want everything to come in and push out the back. But by not having your airflow go in a single direction, you can't control the temperature. Well, you don't know what's getting to your CPU and other components that need that air. Let's say if you had your fans in the front and they were going in, and you had your other fans on the top and the bottom pulling air away. And yeah, the components that they're cooling right here are getting it, but what about your CPU and other components on your motherboard that need that? So make sure that your fans are in the right direction, pulling air in, and your exhaust fan is pushing air out. And if you have an air cooler on your CPU, make sure that it's pushing air from front to back and not the other way around, so you don't get any weird cooling issues, because that can happen if your fans are fighting directions. And the last mistake to avoid is not planning your build. All builds I do, no matter if they're for work or for personal life, I always use a website called pcpartpicker.com. You can get on there and make sure whatever you do is compatible with each other, because it'll be a shame if you bought a new Ryzen 5000 series CPU and you get a board that's made for the Intel 10900K. You see what I'm saying? So having a resource where you can plan builds out, because what happened to me a couple years ago is I was so excited. I bought everything and I went to go put my RAM in and it wouldn't go in. It was a DDR4 board, but I bought DDR3 RAM. So making sure your components work and making sure that you have your budget works with this, because you can want a 3090 from NVIDIA and you can want the latest, biggest, God-like motherboard, but if you only have a $600 budget, you're not gonna be able to get any of that. So planning out your builds, make sure they're compatible, make sure they fit in your budget is one of the biggest mistakes to avoid when you're doing this kind of thing. It saves headache and heartache from you just wasting your money on things and having to send stuff back and all these other things that you could have avoided if you had planned your build. That's it. Thank you guys for joining me. This was a good one. If you like this type of video, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't like this type of video, give me a thumbs down. Tell me why you didn't like this video. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. Have a good one.